Alright, now that we have the repository, let's create a factory so that we can have an instance of the PYZ Antelope query, and we're gonna also create a mapper in order to map the entities that we're gonna get from the Antelope query into our DTOs. Let's get inside the CLI and let's run Spryker-run add Z persistence factory so that we can create the factory for our module. We're gonna specify Antelope as module, and then the layer by default is persistence one. So let's press enter, and you can see that we have the factory here. We extend the abstract persistence factory, and here we define our methods. Let's create a method in order to create an instance of the PYZ Antelope query. We're gonna call it create. Every time we create an object, we prefix the method with the create word. Create, then what object we would like to create. In this case, Antelope query. And we're gonna return an instance of the PYZ Antelope query. And you see that we have here in ORMZ Antelope persistence namespace. And here we simply return PYZ Antelope query, and we can call the method create, which return an instance of the PYZ Antelope query. In this way, if we open the Antelope repository here in our method, we can get an instance of the Antelope query, and let's call it Antelope entities, and we're gonna call this get factory, and automatically Spryker is gonna get an instance of the persistence factory for us. And then we can call, you can see here, create Antelope query. So we have this instance now, and as soon as we type this variable, you can see that we have access to a lot of methods that are present inside the PYZ Antelope query. The simple method that we can call would be the find method, and it would return a collection of entities. But we need to map these entities, and let's call this return object collection, for example, or we can just call it Antelope collection. We need to map this collection here. If we just mouse over, you can see that we're gonna have an array of PYZ Antelope. So in Spryker, we never allow the entities to leave the method. We have to map these entities into DTOs. We always use DTO for input parameters and for return types. So let's create a method, in this class a mapper, to map entities, an Antelope entity, to an Antelope transfer DTO, and a collection of entities to a collection of transfer DTO. We're gonna do this by creating here, inside Propel, we create a folder, and we're gonna call it mapper. And then inside the mapper folder, we create a class, and we're gonna call it Antelope mapper. And then inside this mapper, we're gonna have some methods to map an entity to an Antelope transfer, and vice versa also, because sometimes we need the other way around, and also for the collection. The first method we're gonna create is map Antelope entity to Antelope transfer. And here we're gonna receive an entity, so we can call it PYZ Antelope entity. And the second parameter would be the DTO. So we're gonna type hinted as PYZ as Antelope transfer, and as we're mapping from an entity to an Antelope transfer, we're gonna be returning an Antelope transfer. So in this case, the code is very simple. We just return Antelope transfer, so the instance of the Antelope transfer that we're gonna receive, we can call from array, so we're gonna get the data from an array, and this array would be the Antelope entity, but then we're gonna cast that Antelope entity to an array. You can see here that from array method has a second parameter that is called ignore missing property. We're gonna pass true because we don't want any exception being raised if there is a property missing from the database that doesn't map into the Antelope transfer. We're gonna do the other way around. We're gonna also map from a DTO to an Antelope entity. So let's copy this method and let's just rename it. Let's invert the parameters, and then here we're gonna be returning an Antelope entity. And in this case, we're gonna do the other way around. We're gonna call the Antelope from array, and then we're going to call the Antelope transfer to array. Okay, these two methods only map one entity to a DTO and vice versa. We also need a method to map. In this case, if you take a look here at the repository, we could return a collection of antelopes. Okay, so we need a method also to map from a collection of entities to a collection of DTO. So let's implement also that method, and let's call this method map antelope entity collection to transfer collection. In this case, if we want to shorten the name, we can remove the entity because we know that we have an antelope is an entity, so we can call it map antelope collection to antelope transfer collection transfer. So in this case, we're going to receive an object collection from the query. So here in the repository, we return an object collection. You can see here that the find method returns a collection, so we can type hint here in the antelope mapper that we're going to receive an object collection, and this type comes from propel runtime, and let's call the parameter antelope collection, and then we should map this antelope entities collection to an antelope collection transfer. So what we're going to do is just to prepare an array here of antelope, and we're going to populate this antelope collection transfer. So we're going to iterate the antelope collection as antelope, and then we're going to call antelope collection transfer. And remember that this object, we have the antelopes. We can call set, or in this case add, because we're going to add an antelope to the collection. Add. It should have an add antelope to the collection. Let's take a look at the collection transfer. So we have the protected antelope, we have the pagination. Let's take a look now at the DTO definition to see why that method wasn't generated. You can verify by going to shared antelope transfer, and we have here the pagination, and we have the antelope collection. We have name antelopes, type antelope, and you can see here that we didn't specify that this antelopes is a collection, so we have to add the array signature here, so that we have the possibility to add antelopes to this array, and then we can specify also the singular name, and the singular name is going to be antelope. So let's add these two properties here, and let's run transfer :generate, and now we should see here the possibility to add an antelope. Why? Because now we have a collection, and we're going to have the possibility to add an antelope. You can see here add antelope, and so we pass an antelope transfer here. So we have to pass antelope to this antelope. But remember that we are populating a collection of DTO, so we have to transform this entity into a DTO. But we already have this method here, so we can call here our internal method, this map antelope entity to antelope transfer, and then we pass this antelope, and then we have to pass here a DTO. We can just instantiate here new antelope transfer. Okay, so we pass this instance here so that we have the mapping to this method. If you want to have the code mode clear, you can just extract this variable here. We call it antelope DTO, and then we're going to add it here. And now we can just return our antelope collection transfer, and we have to specify here that we return an antelope collection transfer. Okay, now we have these methods here that are ready. We need to add also the possibility to create this mapper from the factory. So let's create also here a function to get an instance of that mapper. So create antelope mapper, and we return new antelope mapper. Verify that the antelope mapper was imported here, and if we want, we can just, as a good practice, generate an interface from this class. So we can just right click and then refactor, extract interface, and we call it antelope mapper interface. You can see here that now we have class antelope mapper that maps antelope interface. And here in the factory, we can type hint here that we return antelope mapper interface. Okay, now we have the factory ready. We can use here inside our antelope repository, we already called the create antelope query, and now we can just return here just to verify that the code works, we can just return. We can create an instance of the mapper, and mapper would be at this factory, get factory, create Antelope mapper, and we're going to return mapper, map Antelope collection to Antelope collection transfer. And then we're going to pass the Antelope collection that we have here from the find method into the Antelope collection transfer. We don't have the Antelope collection transfer here. We can introduce a variable here, and this would be a new Antelope collection transfer. We can just inline this variable here so that we have a cleaner code, and you can see now that we have the possibility to find the antelopes. We're not adding any condition yet, so we could filter here according to this Antelope criteria transfer. And let's just fix the interface here. Let's see why it's not the same. Okay, we don't have the import here. Now we have the import, and now our code is ready to be tested. Let's give it a try by creating the business layer and adding the business layer in order to create a reader and get the Antelope collection. After that, once that we test that we're returning a collection of antelopes, then we can work on the Antelope criteria transfer and add some more conditions here in the find methods to filter the Antelope collection according to this DTO that we're passing here.